Watch out, gun. The scream tore through the hospital parking lot. Julia Benton, a 28-year-old ER nurse, had just finished her shift when she saw a man collapse, blood soaking his shirt. Without hesitation, she ran. A black SUV came speeding toward them. And when the gunfire began, Julia did what no one else dared. She threw herself between danger and the stranger. The bullet hit her shoulder. She hit the ground beside him. She didn't know who he was. Days later, still healing, Julia entered the hospital lobby and found 12 Marines waiting. One stepped forward and said, "You saved my life, and far more than that." What happened next silenced the entire hospital. Julia Benton was forged in silence, not the kind that's empty, but the kind that holds weight. She grew up on a quiet stretch of land in rural Arkansas, just outside the town of Mountain Home. The roads were dusty, the neighbors distant, and the nights were so still you could hear the coyotes before you saw them. Her home was a small, weather-worn farmhouse surrounded by pine trees that whispered through every season. Her father, Roy Benton, was a Gulf War veteran. Once strong and broad-shouldered, his body bore the slow wear of time and trauma. A roadside explosion left him with a limp and permanent nerve damage down one side of his body, but he never complained. Not once. He woke every morning at 5:00 a.m. and hobbled out to his workshop, even if all he could do was sort screws into coffee cans. He believed in work. He believed in structure. And most of all, he believed in values. Her mother, by contrast, had been the soft place in the family, the warmth, the laughter, the reason holidays felt like more than just dates on a calendar. But she passed when Julia was 10, claimed by a sudden illness that left Roy devastated and Julia confused and too young to understand grief. From that point on, the house got quieter. The warmth faded, but the lessons remained. Roy didn't raise Julia to chase success. He raised her to stand still when the world shifted, to be someone others could lean on. His words became her compass, repeated so often they tattooed themselves on her mind. Right is still right, even if you're the only one doing it. That principle carried Julia through school. While other kids rolled their eyes at volunteer work or bent rules for convenience, Julia stood firm even when it cost her popularity, even when it made her feel alone. When it came time to attend college, she didn't apply to expensive schools or dream of leaving Arkansas. She chose the University of Central Arkansas. For one reason, it had a reputable nursing program, and it was close enough that she could still visit her dad on weekends. But school didn't come easy. She worked the nights at a local diner, refilling coffee for truckers and mopping up sticky floors just to keep the lights on. Sometimes after clinical rotations, she'd get home after midnight, her back aching, only to wake up at 6 for classes again. Her classmates often didn't know how little she slept or how often she skipped lunch just to save gas money. Still, she never complained. There was a quiet rhythm to her life study, serve, sleep, repeat. What she lacked in money, she made up for in grit. Professors noticed her focus. Patients noticed her touch. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was the one people trusted. And though the world didn't see her, her father did. On Sunday evenings, when she'd come home for supper, they'd sit on the porch, just the two of them, the sun setting behind the tree line. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. Other times they talked about everything, the war, the news life, death, and the kind of person the world needed more of. "You don't need a title to make a difference," Roy told her once. "You just need to show up when it counts." She didn't realize then how much those words would matter. How one night, one ordinary Tuesday, she would be given a moment that counted more than any other. And without hesitation, she'd show up. It was supposed to be a normal night. Julia Benton had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift in the emergency room at St. Vincent Memorial. 3 trauma cases had come in at once. Near the end of her shift, a multi-car pileup on the state highway. 2 were airlifted, 1 coded twice. She stayed behind to help the new nurse stabilize the 3rd, then took another hour to fill out the backlog of charts. By the time she clocked out, the halls of the hospital were dim and quiet. The fluorescent buzz had dulled to a whisper. She tied her hair back, threw on her old denim jacket over scrubs, and slung her bag across one sore shoulder. Outside, the parking lot shimmered from the evening drizzle, the concrete still reflecting halos of light from the tall lamps above. Julia's car sat near the far end of the lot, a beat-up Honda she'd driven since nursing school. She was halfway there, already fishing for her keys, when she heard a sound that made her stop cold. A wet thud. She turned. Near the parking garage entrance, a man in a tattered military jacket had collapsed, his body half twisted on the asphalt. Blood was blooming fast through his shirt, too dark, too much, too fast. She recognized signs of internal bleeding before her brain could fully process the scene. And yet no one else moved. A young couple paused, looked, then kept walking. Another man took out his phone to record, not to help. The stranger tried to wave them off even as he struggled to stay conscious. He didn't call out. He didn't ask for help. His eyes scanned the lot, hyper-aware, focused on something. That's when Julia saw it too. Headlights. A black SUV, tinted windows, no plates, cutting through the lot, faster than any vehicle should. It wasn't parking. It wasn't slowing down. It was hunting. Her instincts screamed. She could have turned and sprinted to her car. She could have ducked behind the row of hospital carts and watched from cover. But something deeper took over, something older than training, deeper than fear. She ran, not away but toward him. "Call 911, she shouted over her shoulder, to no one in particular. Her feet hit the pavement hard, echoing through the nearly empty lot. The man on the ground was trying to push himself up, dazed and bleeding. She reached him just as the SUV skidded to a halt about 20 feet away. The driver's side window rolled down. The muzzle flash lit up the inside like a camera's burst. The first shot rang out. Julia threw herself forward, wrapping her arms around the man's shoulders, trying to shield his body with hers. A searing pain tore through her left shoulder, like fire spinning her sideways as her legs gave out beneath her. She hit the ground hard, her head smacking the pavement, her world narrowing into blurry halos and muffled voices. But even through the haze of pain, she remembered his eyes. The man wasn't panicked. He looked at her with something close to disbelief, not just that she had jumped in front of him, but that anyone had. The SUV tore away seconds later, tires screeching into the night, vanishing before anyone could stop it. And then silence. Julia lay bleeding beside the man she tried to protect, gasping through the shock. Darkness edged her vision. She tried to stay awake, tried to speak, but all that came out was a whispered question she didn't even realize she'd asked. "Are you safe?" Then the world fell away, and her story, the real story, began. The first thing Julia felt was pressure, dull, heavy, centered deep in her shoulder. Then came the sterile scent of antiseptic, the faint beeping of a heart monitor, the mechanical hum of fluorescent lights. She was alive. Her eyes fluttered open to the soft blur of a hospital ceiling. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. Then came the memory, wet pavement, a collapsing man, headlights, the gunshot. A nurse in blue scrubs appeared at her side. "Julia, you're in the ICU. You were shot, but you're stable now." Julia blinked slowly. "What?" "About the man." The nurse paused, glanced at the chart. "You were the only one brought in that night. No other victim was found at the scene." "That's not possible," Julia whispered. "He was right there. I was trying to protect him." Later that day, Dr. Levinson, her supervising physician, entered the room, his expression unreadable. "Julia, the bullet passed clean through. You lost blood, but it missed all major arteries. You're lucky." She winced. "Where is he?" "The man in the parking lot." The doctor shifted uncomfortably. Julia's security reviewed the footage. No one else was reported injured. No ambulance picked up another person. "Police think it was an attempted mugging. You were likely the target." "No," Julia said firmly. "I saw him. He was bleeding out. He had a military jacket. I wrapped myself around him." Levinson offered a sympathetic nod, but didn't push further. "You need rest. Let's not get overwhelmed." But she couldn't rest, not with those words echoing in her mind. You were the only one. Throughout the next day, visitors trickled in. Her colleagues brought flowers, cards, awkward jokes. But their words stung more than the wound. "I heard it was a gang thing," whispered Danny from ICU. "Julia, some say the guy you tried to save was a dealer," said Nick, the trauma nurse. "You took a bullet for a lowlife." Julia turned her face to the window. They didn't get it. She hadn't asked who he was. She had seen someone bleeding, someone alone, and she did what she was raised to do. Her father had always said, "You don't ask if they deserve help. You ask if they need it." That night, long after visiting hours ended, Julia noticed something strange, a plain white envelope on her bedside table. No one had mentioned it. Her name was handwritten on the front, nothing else. Inside a short note in clean, sharp handwriting, "No one can know who I am, but I know who you are. You didn't just save me, you saved more than one life. What you did in that parking lot ensured a mission could continue, one that will protect countless others. I owe you everything." LT 4th Recon Unit, MRF. Julia reread it 5 times. It wasn't a prank. The signature, the reference to a mission, the way it spoke of others, it was real. She remembered his jacket, military issued, faded but intact. She remembered how he had tried to wave people off, not because he didn't want help, because he was trying to protect them. Over the next 24 hours, she noticed more oddities. 2 men lingered in the hallway outside her room. They wore maintenance uniforms but didn't clean anything. Their posture was military. They never spoke to staff. When she asked about them, the nurses just said extra security. That night, as she reached for her water, she noticed a coin on the bedside table, old, worn, with a Marine Corps insignia. Not a souvenir, this was something earned. Suddenly, it all made sense. Julia hadn't saved a bystander. She had thrown herself in front of a target, and someone somewhere didn't want her to know why. By the next morning, Julia Benton was no longer simply healing, she was watching, observing, noticing the subtle shifts in her surroundings. Something was off. The 2 maintenance men who lingered in the hallway never swapped out trash bags or carried tools. They stood just a little too straight, their eyes never wandering, their posture too precise. When she tried to make eye contact with one of them, he immediately turned away, almost as if acknowledging her would break protocol. Julia wasn't paranoid. She'd worked in enough trauma wards to spot patterns. She'd seen plainclothes officers guard VIP patients. But this was different. No one had told her anything, and yet she could feel the watchful eyes following every movement. Then there was the woman. She came mid-morning wearing pale blue scrubs and carrying a tray of bandages. Julia didn't recognize her, and that was unusual. After 3 years at St. Vincent, she knew nearly every floor nurse. The woman said nothing as she changed Julia's dressing. Her touch was precise, firm, but respectful. Just as she turned to leave, she leaned in close, too close, and whispered, "He's alive, and he's grateful." Before Julia could respond, she was gone. Julia pressed the call button, demanding to know who the nurse was. The response came back flat. No nurse by that name was on today's roster. That night, she lay awake staring at the coin on her bedside table, the one no one could explain. Heavy in her palm, it bore the Marine Corps emblem, weathered and authentic. On the edge was a series of letters and numbers, 4th Recon, MRF. She had no military background, but she'd heard enough from her father to know what a challenge coin meant. It wasn't just decoration. It was a symbol of trust, of sacrifice, of brotherhood, usually exchanged in the field or given in solemn moments. Why had she been left one? Suddenly, the man's expression from that night came back to her. Not fear, not confusion, but recognition. Not of her, but of what she had done, of the risk she had taken without hesitation. Julia sat up slowly, her shoulder aching. She wasn't imagining this. The man she'd shielded wasn't just wounded. He was important, mission-critical important. She began replaying everything. The SUV without plates, the silence in the aftermath, how no one had ever filed a public report, no media coverage, no police interviews. It had all been swept under the rug. Someone had made her invisible. And then the final clue. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, she stood at her hospital room door and cracked it open. Down the hall, one of the supposed maintenance men was speaking into a shoulder mic, low, deliberate. Target remains stable, no unusual movement. Surveillance continuing through morning. Target, not patient, not nurse. Target. Julia stepped back and closed the door slowly. Now she knew. She wasn't just under protection, she was under watch. But why the letter had said her actions saved more than one life? Had she stumbled into a covert operation? Had she interfered in something classified? Whatever it was, someone was ensuring she stayed silent, but safe. She looked at the coin again. Whatever had happened in that parking lot wasn't over. And deep down, Julia realized something else. This wasn't just about the man she saved. It was about what he was carrying, and why someone wanted him dead. The knock on her hospital door came just before sunset. It wasn't rushed, nor tentative. It was firm, intentional. Julia looked up from her hospital bed expecting another nurse, or perhaps the administrator with discharge paperwork. Instead, the door opened, and in stepped a tall man in a Marine Corps dress uniform. His posture was straight as a rifle barrel, his ribbons a rainbow of service and his eyes steel gray, fixed on her with the kind of focus that could freeze a room. He removed his cap and offered a small, respectful nod. "Miss Benton," he said, "may I sit?" Julia nodded, uncertain, her heart already beginning to race. He sat gently on the visitor's chair beside her bed, setting his cap on his lap. "My name is Colonel Thomas Granger, United States Marine Corps retired. I'm not here officially. In fact, none of what I'm about to say is part of any record. But you deserve to know the truth." Julia didn't speak. She only watched him waiting. The colonel glanced toward the hallway to ensure no one was listening. Then he leaned in, his voice calm but low. "The man you saved in the parking lot was Commander Ethan Rourke, one of our highest-level special operations officers. He was returning from an international operation when he was intercepted. The SUV that fired on him wasn't just a random act of violence, it was an assassination attempt." Julia blinked. "Assassination?" Granger nodded. He was carrying intelligence. Not on his phone, not in a briefcase. On his person, in his memory. He'd spent 8 days embedded with foreign assets gathering intel on multiple planned attacks. That information was time-sensitive and irreplaceable. Her mind reeled. She had thought he was just a bleeding man in the dark. He refused extraction by helicopter to avoid drawing attention, Granger continued. He insisted on walking out alone, entering civilian infrastructure to reduce the risk to his team. But someone leaked his route. They knew where he'd be. "And I just happened to be there," Julia whispered. "No," the colonel said. "You weren't just there. You acted. You made a choice when most people would have frozen or fled." He reached into the inner pocket of his uniform and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When he unfolded it, Julia recognized it immediately. It was the same Marine Challenge coin that had appeared beside her hospital bed. But this time it wasn't alone. Alongside it was a small dark pin, almost unnoticeable, bearing the emblem of the 4th Reconnaissance Battalion. "This is Commander Rourke's personal coin," Granger said. "It's only given to those who've saved the life of a fellow Marine in combat. He left it for you." Julia reached for it with trembling fingers. "Is he alive?" she asked. "He's recovering, quietly. You gave him enough time to get away and for support to extract him safely. Because of your action, we were able to stop 3 planned attacks on U.S. embassies within 72 hours. Intelligence confirms hundreds of lives were spared." She covered her mouth, stunned. "I'm no one," she said. "I was just doing what I was taught. Help people. That's all." Colonel Granger smiled, and for the first time it softened the hard lines of his face. "That's exactly why this matters. You didn't act because of rank or orders. You acted because it was right. That kind of instinct is rare even among those in uniform." He stood slowly, taking back the cloth but leaving the coin in her hand. "There will be no official medal, no press conference. What happened will remain classified." Julia nodded. She didn't need headlines. She just wanted to know the truth. But Granger added, pausing at the door, "Commander Rourke and his team wanted to find a way to thank you anyway. Quietly, personally. Tomorrow morning before your discharge, there will be a small ceremony. No press, just Marines. And a moment we believe you deserve." He looked at her one last time and his voice softened. "You changed the course of events that night. You didn't just save a man. You saved a mission. You saved lives. And now those lives remember you." With that, he placed his cap back on his head, saluted her not sharply but sincerely, and left the room. Julia sat in stunned silence, the coin cold in her palm. Her father's words rang louder than ever. Right is still right, even if you're the only one doing it. She hadn't just been in the right place. She had been the right person. The morning of her discharge arrived with soft sunlight pouring through the hospital window. Julia Benton sat on the edge of her bed, her arm still in a sling, the pain in her shoulder a dull throb. But what consumed her wasn't the discomfort. It was the colonel's words echoing from the night before. A small ceremony, just Marines, and a moment you deserve. She had dressed carefully, choosing a clean button-down shirt and dark jeans. It wasn't much, but it felt more dignified than hospital scrubs. When Dr. Levinson came to check her vitals, his tone was unusually gentle. "Before you go, there are some people in the lobby who asked to see you." Julia nodded. She didn't trust her voice. The walk down the hospital corridor felt longer than usual. With each step, her heart pounded harder, not from fear, but from something deeper: anticipation, disbelief, and the overwhelming weight of meaning. When the elevator doors opened into the main lobby, she stopped in her tracks. 12 Marines stood in formation at the center of the room, dressed in full-dress blues. Their posture was flawless, their boots polished to mirrors, their eyes fixed ahead, not cold but proud. Behind them, patients in wheelchairs, nurses on break, and even a few hospital custodians had gathered quietly along the edges of the lobby. The space, normally filled with casual chatter and movement, had fallen completely silent. Commander Ethan Rourke stood at the front of the formation. His right arm was bandaged, but his posture was strong. He stepped forward the moment Julia appeared, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't smile, not exactly, but there was something in his expression, honor, gratitude, gravity, that said more than words could. "Nurse Julia Benton," he said, voice steady but rich with emotion. "4 nights ago, you made a decision that altered the course of lives you'll never meet. You saw danger and didn't run. You saw a stranger and acted as though he was your own. You didn't know who I was. You didn't know what was at stake. But you moved without hesitation, because that's who you are." The weight of the moment hit her like a wave. Her throat tightened. Commander Rourke nodded to his men. In perfect unison, all 12 Marines snapped to attention and raised their hands in a synchronized salute. The sound of boots clicking into place echoed across the tiled floor like a heartbeat. It was the kind of moment no camera could capture, no medal could replace. As they held their salute, Commander Rourke stepped closer, holding a folded American flag in his hands. "This flag flew over our base in Syria," he said during the mission. "Your actions helped protect. It's been to places most Americans will never see, and it came home because of what you did." Julia reached out slowly and accepted the flag, her hands trembling. He then extended something smaller, his personal challenge coin. She recognized it instantly, the same one that had appeared on her bedside table. But this time it was given directly, solemnly. "Only one is issued per Marine. But this one belongs to you now," he said quietly. "Not for bravery in battle, but for bravery in compassion." Her eyes welled with tears. She could barely whisper, "I just did what anyone should do." Commander Rourke gave a faint smile. "That's exactly why you're a hero." As he stepped back, the Marines lowered their salute. Applause broke out gently, then built in waves. Nurses clapped. Patients clapped. Even hospital security wiped away tears while nodding solemnly. Julia stood in the middle of it all, folded flag in one hand, coin in the other, frozen between awe and humility. Her father's voice echoed again in her mind. "Right is still right, even if you're the only one doing it." And for the first time since that night in the parking lot, Julia let herself believe something extraordinary. She hadn't just helped a man, she had done the right thing, and it had changed the world. What makes a hero? Is it the uniform, the medals, the title? Or is it the quiet decision made in the space between instinct and fear? The moment no one sees when a person chooses to act, not because they have to, but because it's right. Julia Benton never saw herself as a hero. She wasn't trained in combat. She didn't carry a weapon or wear rank on her shoulders. She was a nurse, a tired, overworked, underpaid nurse who had simply walked into a parking lot at the wrong time, or maybe exactly the right time. But that night changed more than one life. It reminded us of something we often forget in today's world of fast judgment and digital distance, that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it doesn't come with headlines. It doesn't always involve running into burning buildings or charging across battlefields. Sometimes it's just a woman with a sore shoulder and a heavy bag deciding that she can't ignore someone who's bleeding on the ground. Her act was instinctive but not impulsive. It came from years of quiet strength, from a childhood built on resilience, and from a father who taught her that doing the right thing doesn't require applause. That parking lot became a battlefield of a different kind, one where compassion met violence and where empathy proved stronger than bullets. Julia never asked who the man was. She didn't ask if he deserved help. She didn't hesitate based on politics, background, or uniform. She saw a human being in danger, and she ran toward him. That's what makes her extraordinary. And yet, perhaps what's most remarkable is that her story isn't entirely unique. All across this country, people step up in small, invisible ways. Nurses hold the hands of patients with no family. Teachers buy lunch for children they know can't afford it. Strangers stop on highways to push broken down cars. Veterans volunteer at shelters. Retirees bring groceries to their neighbors. Everyday courage. Everyday sacrifice. What Julia did was monumental, but also a mirror, a reflection of what we could be if we chose to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to act even when no one's watching. So maybe the real takeaway isn't just what happened that night, but the question it leaves behind. What would you do? Would you stop? Would you step in? Would you shield a stranger? And if you already have, if you've ever acted out of pure instinct to help someone in need, then maybe you too are part of something bigger. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply care. A week after her discharge, Julia Benton returned to her father's front porch in rural Arkansas. The same creaking swing, the same pine trees whispering in the wind. But something inside her had changed. She still wore the sling, and her steps were slower, but she held herself differently now. Not with pride exactly, but with quiet conviction. The folded flag and challenge coin now rested in a small wooden box her father had built for her, sitting beside old family photos and a rusted set of dog tags from his Gulf War service. He hadn't said much when she returned, just poured her a cup of coffee, handed her a blanket, and sat beside her. Then after a long silence, he said, "I always knew you'd do something that mattered." Julia didn't answer. She didn't need to. The world would go on as usual. Her name wouldn't be in the paper. No one outside that hospital lobby would ever know what she stopped. But that was never the point. And maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes being the hero doesn't mean changing the world. It means showing up in one moment and refusing to look away. So to everyone watching this, have you ever had a moment like Julia's? Maybe it wasn't life or death, but maybe you stood up for someone, helped a stranger, spoke up when it was easier to stay silent. We'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. Let others see the quiet courage that still exists in this world, because those stories matter. And if Julia's actions inspired you, share this video. Subscribe for more stories like this, stories that remind us who we are at our best. And remember, you don't have to wear a uniform to serve. You just have to be the right person at the right time. Thank you for watching, and thank you for choosing to care.